Sveiki įsijungę bėgimo ir triatlono klubo Lovestreamsrunning tinklalaidę. Čia dalinamės treniruočių patarimais, kalbiname sportininkus bei kitus sporto pasaulio žinovus. Kviečiame klausytis ir tobulėti kartu. Hello everyone. Today we're going to have our very first Lovestreamsrunning podcast in English. And the reason for that is because today in studio we have very well-known sports physiologist Gareth Sandford. Gareth came to Lithuania for a coaching conference organized by Lithuanian Athletics Federation, and he's best known for his work with world-class coaches and athletes on how to maximize their sprinting and endurance potential. And today we're going to talk about Gareth's experience, athlete profiling, most important training menu items, and much more. So we hope you're going to enjoy this conversation. And now let's just get into it. So Gareth, welcome to Lithuania and welcome to our podcast.
Honest, it's great to be here, and I've really loved the last few days getting to know your culture, see your city. So thanks for having me and thanks for showing me around.
Perfect. So maybe we can start off by you introducing yourself, what you do, and then maybe you can tell us how you ended up in Lithuania.
Yeah, so I'm originally from England, but I haven't lived there now for 9 years. My path in track and field really started at school, competing myself as a very amateur sprinter. But I've been working in the sport since about 2009. Started with sprints coaching and coach education, and as I sort of studied physiology at master's level, you start working all the way through to the marathon and cycling and triathlon and all these items too, which is very interesting because then 2015 moved to New Zealand, and there I was doing study on 800, 1500 meter running, and how do we make people faster on the last lap? How do we tolerate and manage surging in a race? And through that time, as well as studying, I worked with everything from 400 meters through to the race walk. As part of this time in New Zealand, I spent 6.5 months traveling to middle distance and long distance squads around the world. And this was working with over 80 coaches, 9 different countries. And we tested over 200 athletes during this time. And you know, one of the challenges that I found coaches in track and field really have is in these middle distance squads particularly, you have these high range of different profiles. You know, some people that are more explosive, more powerful, some people that are more endurance based, and everything in between. And this creates quite the challenge. And so the work I do now is I run a business helping coaches around the world with this full time.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I actually came to Lithuania, because our national federation had a conference for coaches, actually 2 days ago from when we're filming, and you were one of the guest speakers that came and shared your experiences to our coaches who are working with not even pro athletes, but also with the young developing athletes. So that was really, really insightful, and I hope that most of the coaches took something from it. But yeah, how has been your experience in Lithuania so far?
Yeah, it's been like the conference was wonderful. The session of presenting was a couple of hours, but we in total spent about 6 hours. And so to me, one of the qualities of coaches that I think are really important is being curious, being open-minded, looking to learn, looking to evolve. And yeah, by hours 5 or 6, there was still 15 to 20 coaches in the room asking questions. And so I think there's a lot for the athletics community in Lithuania to be very excited about, because with that curiosity, that can take you a long way.
And hopefully that's going to be the case.
Yeah.
Because, we've been talking for quite a while that we don't, of course, we can say that we're a small country, but we know from other countries' examples that being small is sometimes not an excuse, and you can do really good things even being small. But yeah, we've noticed that we sometimes we don't have the results we would maybe like to have on the Olympic level, international level. And sometimes it's just a lack of talent, maybe. Sometimes it's a structural thing, and we need to work on both of these things, finding those talents and guiding them to the top elite level. And your presentation about how to do that, your principles, your menu of what to do was really, really insightful and helpful. So today we're gonna talk a little bit about that, but we're also gonna talk about broader maybe perspective. And as we talked before the episode, we're gonna name this one Recovery Talks.
Okay.
And it might have some kind of technical details, some deeper stuff into the science, but we're gonna try to have it informal conversation about what your experiences have been, what could pro athletes, coaches, and even amateur runners could take away from this, from hearing you and from all the experience that you have and the coaches and the athletes you've seen apply.
Yeah, I think a good place to start with that is that high performance is not a facility, it's not a budget, it's a mindset. And this is one of the reasons that I came to Lithuania, because you know, the thing you did was take action. You reached out, we had a conversation. I could hear talking to you that you guys, you know, and meeting with Jonas Tadas yesterday, like, you are building something here and you care deeply. And with that desire, you can achieve a lot. And you know, I was very lucky in my early 20s to do a lot of touring of the UK for talent campaigns for UK Sport, which is the funding branch of the UK system. And they would do campaigns where you go around the country trying to find the next talent that could maybe be an Olympian. Now that campaign, they spent millions of dollars on those kind of things. And I've sat in a number of rooms in different countries around the world where organizations may say, oh, we can't do that because we don't have millions of dollars. Now, in 2014, I went out to rural India for 3 months, and I went and lived in a tribal community where English was the third language, and the facilities we had for track and field was a field and a sand pit. And in this school where, you know, kids as young as 12, 13, we decided to do essentially a sports day that used the principles of the testing from the UK sports side of things, which were, can you sprint, can you jump, can you throw, and varying iterations. We had whistles, we had cones, and in one day we took 107 tribal kids through all these movements, these different qualities. We ran a bleep test, I remember, with a laptop and a whistle.
Okay.
And so I look at that and go, you know, the people in that area were earning $2 a day. But we took the principles of what was rolled out in the UK and applied it in this context. And we left the other side with all of the coaches having a deeper understanding of where the strengths of different individuals were. And none of that required a budget. It required a mindset. It required let's go
action.
And do that. Yeah, and action, exactly. And so this is the opportunity, I think, that presents here.
Nice. That's really a good example. And what was your key takeaway, apart from just that taking an action is enough sometimes, but what did you see in those kids? Maybe, I don't know, if you had 107 kids tested, right?
Yeah.
Did you see something, the potential, the talent?
Yeah, it's very interesting. Even if we take, let's say, a micro skill in track and field, like a block start, I remember there was one individual, he was about 14. And I should also say, barely any of these children would have shoes.
Yeah.
So this is barefoot. And I remember we did a 100-meter start, and there was an image of this kid out of the blocks, and, you know, high arm lift, really nice hip, knee, ankle position, dorsiflex foot. I'm going, this kid has never been taught to do this, and yet naturally he just has something. And you go, you know, all these kids need is the right opportunity, the right know-how. And, you know, in smaller nations, as you know, it's like there might not be too many that have the talent to go all the way on the Olympic pathway. And so the important thing is, first of all, identifying them. And then when you have them, minimizing the risk of things going sideways, you know. And so this is a big part of how I think about training athletes, is we want to understand what the gifts of the individual are, so that we are nurturing them and making sure we take them with the athlete throughout their career. Because by the time they get to the highest level of what they could do, whether that's school level, whether that's college level, whether that's Olympic level, those gifts that they have that are unique to them will be the things that they leverage against the competition.
Yeah, nice. Actually, when you were talking about this, I remembered your example about the plane. It used the.
Yeah, so a way to think about athlete development is, you know, those of you who've taken a long haul flight will know what that's like, right? You could be on the runway and maybe you're 1 degree left or right of the destination. Let's say you're flying from Lithuania to Australia. It's a long way.
Very far away.
Very far away. 1 degree left or right at takeoff doesn't feel like a big deal. Maybe you're 5 degrees left or right. Maybe you're 8 degrees left or right. And again, it doesn't feel too big a deal. But the problem arises when you get to the destination or get towards the destination, because if you don't course correct, then you could end up maybe in New Zealand, maybe in the ocean, maybe in Hawaii.
New Zealand wouldn't be the worst part, actually.
It wouldn't be the worst part, but it's not where you were planning to go. And so this is a way to think every decision you make every day about training is either taking you further towards or further away from that end destination. And so to me, this is another characteristic of, let's say, those athletes that are consistently able to improve year on year, which is important, but also at the higher levels, consistently able to deliver success is every day they are curious and there is rigor about, are we doing the right thing today? Based on where we are right now and where we're trying to go.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about your work and what you've done. And you've been traveling all over the place, all over the world. As you mentioned, you're from UK, but you live in Canada. You've been to Australia, New Zealand, India, and all of those countries. And you mentioned that you've been traveling for 6 months.
Yeah, that was when I was in New Zealand.
Yeah, when you were in New Zealand, trying to find something about the high performance. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
What was the goal of you traveling so much, and what did you find? What were your experiences from your trips?
Well, let's start with the reason for doing the trip. So working with middle distance coaches, a lot of the questions I was getting about the athletes training was coaches would maybe use a model. So let's say that may come from either a previous successful coach or an idea that they'd read. And one of the things that I realized quite quickly with training models, whether that's Arthur Lydiard, Peter Coe and that model, whether that's something from Igloy or anything in history, is that each of these models were developed from a moment in time. And so that model worked for that individual that it was developed for, but that doesn't mean that it, works for everybody. And I know people understand that, but do they take action on it in that way? And one of the traps that I think is hard for middle distance coaches is if we have a model, middle distance running has the highest variability of types of athletes that can have success. You can have someone who's a speed-based 800-meter runner, and you can have someone who's a 1500-based 800-meter runner, and they both have the same objective of 2 laps as fast as you can. But the training that's going to get them there is totally different. And so the reason for going and visiting all these coaches was to understand, A, what is the spread around the world of what we're seeing? You know, what does someone right at the far end of speed look like that is doing 800 meters? What does someone at the far other end look like on the endurance side, and everything in between? And then how are coaches at this end or the other end training each of those things? And so that was the reason for the trip. I also wanted to understand, there are some athletes you'll know that maybe have success one time.
Mm-hmm.
They achieve a medal once. And then there are some that seem to be able to do it consistently. And I wanted to understand, or at least deepen my understanding of how are people consistently delivering success. Because doing it once is hard, but consistently is harder. And, you know, one of the observations I had is that the environments where people were consistently delivering success. So what do I mean by that? I mean either delivering multiple medals across multiple championships with either one or multiple athletes. That would be success.
Yeah.
Doing it one time is obviously fantastic, but that's not consistent success. The big difference I saw between those two groups was that the groups that were doing it successfully, they lived in an environment where it was both high support, but also high challenge. And the coaches also had that curiosity we talked about a little bit earlier. But the high support, high challenge piece is really important, because if something is just high support and low challenge, then people can get comfortable. Mm-hmm. And that means you don't put the same level of scrutiny around the training session we're doing, the direction of the program. You know, are we holding each other accountable to high performance standards to help you reach your potential? If you have, you know, low support and high challenge, now you're just being nasty to people, right? And so the sweet spot for consistent high performance is this high support, high challenge idea. And that applies, and I see this in business with my friends who are founders of companies and very successful, all the way to elite athletes and professional organizations that are operating at a very high level. And so again, this is free. Anybody can do that. It's about the culture you create, the mindset you create. Who do we want to be, right? Because if we have lofty goals, then we want to set a culture of, yes, high support, but also constructive, supportive challenge, because that helps us get better.
Okay, nice. That's really nice insight. But I was just thinking about the consistency and the being on the top for a longer time. And we know from the studies that when you're really successful at a young age, that is not a good predictor of your late career success in your 25s, 30s, and so on. Have you noticed if those one and done athletes, maybe they've been training for too much, like when they were young kids, or they just reached their potential too soon, and maybe vice versa, those who had the more longer careers, longer successful careers, maybe they had really nice progressive way into that.
Yeah, I think there's definitely no one factor that explains that, but there's a framework I've kind of come to that I think really helps us regularly check in and calibrate. Are we heading in the right direction when it comes to delivering on athletes' potential? So if I'll just outline those steps. So, you know, the first one is the athlete goal, right? Not everybody is trying to be an Olympic medalist, and that's okay, right? And there's nothing better or worse about that. They're just different, right? But we want to be clear on what that is, because that then shapes the second thing, which is the event demand.
Mm-hmm.
And we need that to exist somewhere within the team, an understanding. We don't want athletes to be burdened by what a speed or closing split needs to be, but that information should exist within the system. So if you're a high school athlete, then what you have to do at your national championships is very different to what someone needs to be able to do in an Olympic final. But the principles, let's say, if you want to go to an NCAA college, of being able to close fast or being able to handle surging, like those same principles apply, but the probably in some avenues, the splits will just be turned down a little bit. But that helps give us a bit of a North Star of where we're heading, those two, okay? Then we have the athlete profile. And this encompasses all areas of the medical history of the athlete, nutritional status, psychology, the physiology, which we can go into much deeper, the strength and conditioning, but all these different characteristics that as an athlete make you who you are. And sometimes what I see is there'll be one side that might say, okay, it's all about the event demand. And there will be another side that will say, oh, well, it's all about the athlete. And the problem is with both of those sides is you're over-indexing on one of the two things. And again, when we talk about delivering consistent success in a high support, high challenge environment, the consistency of really good decision making about, are we doing what we're aiming for consistently through knowledge of the event and through who you are as an athlete over time? I mean, this is the whole thing. And then underpinning all of this is, does the coach's training plan set that athlete up for success based on who they are, the event they're going for, and their goal? And when those four things are in alignment consistently, this is when I think in an environment that is high support, high challenge, I think you're now really on a path to build something pretty special. It's very hard to do that. But a lot of those principles I learned from, a lot of high-level investors, things like this. I've studied a lot of business and founders as a business owner. And that consistency of decision-making is so important for coaches. If you think every day as a coach, you're making decisions about how many of these should we do? What do we have tomorrow? When's the next race? Oh, after 2 of these, so-and-so looks like they're struggling, but other people are doing well. And like at each of those intersections, you have a decision to make.
Yeah.
And so is it in alignment with that framework or not? Or is your plane going to hit the ocean? Right? Like this is the dance.
Yeah. And I think you've summarized it really, really nicely. But I think at the end of the day, it also comes down to the alignment between the coach's goals and the athlete goals. And it has to be perfectly honest. They have to be perfectly honest with each other, because if the coach, let's say athlete, says that, I just want to be a national level athlete, and the coach is secretly planning for him to be something more, and maybe the coach will think that the athlete is doing all those right things, not even on the workouts, but after the workouts, because we only spend 2 hours a day in training, and we have 22 more hours. And maybe he's going to go grab a beer with his friends, do something like late nights and no recovery and so on. And then, that misalignment might lead to either the end of the relationship or the end of the career.
Yeah, I think it's friction and frustration on both sides. I mean, I remember someone very early on when I was at university working with a lot of development triathletes. During my master's, I remember somebody saying to me, you can never want it more than the athlete.
Okay.
So if an athlete's ambition isn't to go to the Olympics and be an Olympic medalist, then, you're trying to put a square peg in a round hole. And that ends up with frustration for the coach because the
He's
athlete,
expecting.
and it's a misalignment of expectations, and I think that's more of a headache trying to pursue that. I really think I think you also have to look at what environment does that create. If it is that a high support environment? Is it?
Which might be at the beginning, but then when you are more and more frustrated, then you're gonna be, if you don't care, I don't care.
Yeah, well, and also as a coach, you only have so many matches to burn, right, in terms of your time. And so if someone doesn't want it as much as you want it, is that the best spend of your time and energy? It doesn't mean you don't set things up in the right way. And the other piece I'd say is a training group is made up of many components, right? It's not just about the people who are going to go to the Olympic podium. It's really not. You need the reliable people, right? The people that are going to show up every week, the people that are fun to be around and that are social and build a good environment. So all of these elements make up a good training group. So it's not just about the sharp end. Yeah.
Can we go a little bit deeper into this? Because sometimes we see different examples. Let's say if we take Kobe Bryant, he's one of the best NBA all-time players of basketball, and his mindset, he just wants to grind it out. He comes to the gym 3 hours before everybody else does, and it seems like he's doing it for his own reasons, but he's doing it maybe alone sometimes. And you're talking, and I'm also a fan of this philosophy that training process needs to be fun. You need to support yourself with the people that you want to be around with, that support you and make you a better person. Have you noticed anything from your trips, from your experience, from working with all those athletes? Like, what type of qualities do those people, do those coaches, athletes have? Are they more into their, egos and trying to be the best they could for the some kind of different reasons, maybe to impress somebody, maybe to prove somebody wrong, or maybe they're doing it for just the sake of trying to be the best and having fun doing it?
Yeah, I mean, people have different motivations, right? I mean, a good example of that is the Michael Jordan Last Dance documentary. I think, the main thing I would say is, as an athlete, you want to be developing around you that high support, high challenge environment if you have big goals, but you want to train in a sustainable way. We've talked a couple of times, like at the moment, the marathon record holder on the women's side for Team Canada is in their early 40s, right? 2:23. And there was an Olympic marathoner I worked with at the Tokyo Olympics. And again, they were just over 40. They came 9th in the Tokyo Olympics. But in 2004, they went to the Olympics in the 1500. Right? And so I'm painting that point because you can't burn all your matches at once if you want to have longevity as a career. And so the environment you create around you, the people in your inner circle that you trust, but also have the knowledge to help take you along this pathway are really the key factors, I think. And some athletes will go searching around a lot between different groups and things like this, and to me that's usually like a symptom of we haven't got a stable situation that we truly trust or are happy with and can go searching. But actually, one of the things we've talked about is consistency of training is like one of the most important, if not the most important things in athletics. And so creating an environment for yourself that enables that is like really important. If you're changing environment every 18 months, 2 years, you're not creating any stability in that situation. And, there was a really nice study a couple of years ago from Australian track and field. And they looked at over 5 years, the probability of you achieving your performance goals were 7 times more likely if you achieved over 80% of your planned training. So what does that mean? Well, that means that if we're compromising training all the time because either it's too hard or we're injured or, we don't have a consistency of environment, then we're very quickly chipping away from that 100 and we're getting below 80%. And then what are our expectations? We think we're still going to achieve our goals when we're not doing like the table stakes thing of being consistent. So I think these are really important principles. If you're trying to set up an environment for success, one of the topics we talked about at the conference was the long run. And, you'll remember from your time in New Zealand, big culture, Church of the Sunday long run, right? With Arthur Lydiard. And Arthur Lydiard, great ambassador for running and for New Zealand in the world, and contributed a lot. But one of the, let's say, misinterpretations, I think, of his work is that it was only about mileage.
Yeah.
Someone like a Peter Snell was doing lots of hill bounding and things like this to develop his speed too. And so what that creates sometimes in a misinterpretation of training models, back to the models piece, is, in order to be able to develop aerobically, I need to do 2-hour long runs as an 800-meter runner, or I need to be able to do 100 miles a week. And it's like, well, no. The principle is you need to be doing enough to continue to stimulate progressive overload, but we have to bring these things into context. And sometimes chasing these arbitrary mileage metrics or a long run needs to be this amount lead us down this path of, okay, now we can't achieve that 80% of consistency because we've chased this thing. And so I think these are a lot of traps that young development athletes can run into. You have a whole career to go there with those things. And so we want to build the foundation right and be very strategic about doing that over time. And one of the important things from the aerobic side in terms of adaptation and training response is we want consistency over time. And so there are people that, I've worked with where they'll do a lot of cross training for the easy, low intensity workouts because consistency is the most important thing. And I'll make that trade-off every day of the week if it means that we can have, 2, 3, 4 years of uninterrupted training rather than, okay, we tried to push the long run out and we had to, compromise on a lot of training for 3 months. It's like your 80%'s gone.
Yeah.
And I think
chances to reach your potential.
Exactly. And I think this happens a lot. Yeah.
Okay, so I think we drifted a little bit from the initial thought, but I think the summary, as you mentioned, should be like, no matter the reason, no matter the motivation, the consistency, the environment that you surround yourself with, and your just inner drive and knowledge. Not maybe when you're a young kid, you don't have to know everything, but you can have a support that knows everything, that does the planning for you, does the knowledge for you. So basically these 3 things, if you execute it and you have the consistency and, as you mentioned, do at least 80% of what you've planned or what your coach planned, this should lead you to something.
Yeah, I think it's setting, you can do a lot of things to set the environment up for success.
Yeah.
But those would be the key items, yeah.
Okay, nice. We had a Q&A session a couple of weeks ago here on our episode in Lithuanian, and one of the questions people asked was, maybe I'll do a little background for the listeners. There might be some listeners from out of Lithuania. So our national marathon record is 2 hours, 12 minutes and 35 seconds. I'm sorry, for the male, and I think this was achieved in 2000s or even 1990 something. And since then, we only had one marathoner who came close to this result, and he ran 2:12:50, Remigijus Kančys. You met him a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
And the question was, what should happen and when we could expect, how we can expect Lithuanian national major marathon winner. Like, what has to go right for us to have this big jump from 2:12 to 2:02, 2:03 maybe. And as we discussed it with Jonas, we said we probably need a little bit of a miracle, because you need a talent. Definitely you need to have a right person to do this. But even with the right person, so much things can go so wrong. But yeah, what's your opinion on that? Do you think it's possible for Lithuania to have a 2:02, 2:03 marathoner?
Well, 100% it's possible. I think I think again it's around the mindset, right? I think a miracle is actually the wrong word.
Okay.
Because I think that puts it in this like, oh, this is totally not achievable thing. Or it would be
miracles happen.
They do, but the same way, I think the way I think about a lot of these things is move very deliberately with intention, define what the goal is and set the thing up for success. So in the marathon, what are we talking about? Well, you know, ultimately you're dealing with someone with probably quite a large VO2 max, or either very, very strong running economy. So for the listeners, what is running economy? Running economy is the submaximal oxygen uptake. So a lower amount of oxygen that you use for a running speed would be more economical. We can share a graphic or something in the show notes to further elaborate on that point. So those are, when we're understanding the athlete profile, those are like two of the underpinning qualities you want. Why is a high VO2 max important? So VO2 max, the maximal amount of oxygen you can take in and utilize. Why is that important? Well, the best marathoners, and there's some data on this from the Nike Breaking 2 project.
Andy Jones.
Yeah, exactly. Where they showed that some of the best marathoners were able to sustain a very, very high percentage of that VO2 max for the duration of the marathon. So the kind of tipping point for that is going to be somewhere between your first and second lactate threshold. So this is the goal, right? You either get there by being able to having a huge amount you can take in and working at a high percentage of it, or maybe you have a slightly lower VO2 max, but you're very, very efficient at using it. So these are the two areas. So that's, let's say, the physiology template we're talking about. To go a step further then with the demands of the marathon, so we've done the athlete profile, we're now talking about the event demand of the marathon. So because of the duration, you know, we're really, there's a big fueling component to that. Do you have your nutritional intake down in your strategy? So the textbook recommendations typically something like 60 grams of carbohydrate per hour consumption, but some of the athletes I've worked with can't tolerate that amount. You know, some people have sensitive stomachs, let's say, and so this is a very individual thing. So again, with the nutrition side, you want to dial in your fueling strategy across the marathon to make sure that you are taking something in from that first station, because it's in the range of somewhere like 15 to 25 minutes for it to get into the stomach and your body actually to be utilizing it. So if you wait till 3/4 of the way through thinking that's going to start helping you, then like it's kind of too late.
Yeah.
You know,
it's definitely too late.
It's definitely too late, right? So that you have that piece. You then have, okay, you might have your running economy fresh, let's say, when you do a step test in the laboratory where it's a 3-minute stage. But what's your economy after 2 hours of running? And so there's we call this in physiology durability. Can you reproduce that same efficiency after you run for 2 hours? And there's a big, have you done the training to enable you to get there piece to that? But this is a item that is obviously, that has applications all the way down to 400. Can you repeat 400 meters for 3 rounds, same principle, right? But this durability as a training piece is something that comes with training age, but also some training specificity to make sure that your training is enabling you to repeat the velocities, the efficiencies when you're fresh under fatigue. That's not a something for development athletes to worry about so much, but more senior athletes building in the marathon, it's like that's a key component. And then the other item I would say, well, a couple of other items as you approach the race, I often find, I actually had a conversation in the last couple of weeks about this. An athlete was saying to me, I really need to race to know what shape I'm in.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if that's how you feel, then there's probably some adjustments to make in training, because one of the important pieces of executing a race really well is executing to the fitness you are in. So let's say you might have a goal of 210 because you want to smash the current record. But if you're not in 210 shape, it is no good for you to run the first half of that marathon at 210 pace if that's not the fitness you were in.
Especially in the marathon.
Yeah. That leads to these really what I call divergent outcomes, right? You either, are Superman, Superwoman on the day, or you have an absolute disaster, right? And so when you are trying to tackle a record attempt, when you look at how people have done that over time, it's from a very consistent, very measured pacing strategy that's dialed into the shape they're in. So you need workouts in these last few weeks. Let's say last, 6 to 10 weeks, your last big training block that kind of give you that indicator of what shape you're in. Then you have, where are you running the race, right? What course are you running it on? Because you want to probably avoid the following. You want to avoid a really hilly course. Don't go to Boston and try and run the record, right?
Yeah.
Or I did a recon of the Paris Marathon course, and it was like, they ran surprisingly fast given what a disaster of a course that was to try and run fast.
13 degrees. Uphill.
Remarkable. Yeah, horrible for trying to run fast, but some of them did it.
And they broke both women and male broke the Olympic record. So
remarkable.
It was insane.
Yeah. Then
it wasn't as hot as it was planned, so it still doesn't change anything.
Yeah, so we've done fitness, we've done pacing element, and then we've done, the last bit is the environmental temperature, because, the optimal temperature to run marathon from a thermoregulation, so how your body manages a hot environment and adjusts physiologically to a hot environment, it's about 12 degrees.
Yeah, 10 to 12.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so this is a big part in the last sort of 72, 48 hours that I am thinking about when someone's about to deliver on a marathon, is its pacing becomes the integration of those things, right? So the Tokyo Olympics, we knew for a long time that was going to be the hottest marathon on record. Our two girls that came 9th and 13th, if you look at their splits, like they're almost even first and second half. And that meant, because of the environment running as much as 15 to 20 seconds off the actual fitness shape they were in, because it was fitness shape at sea level in perfect conditions, but then you have to adjust and think about what's the environmental temperature doing, right? And so, the training is one piece, but as you can see from this whole piece, there's all these factors to dial in. And then if it is hot, do you have a cooling strategy? But if you're trying to do a record, I wouldn't run somewhere hot.
Okay, that's a really good point. And actually, one of the reasons why I wanted to ask you this question, because actually this morning I was running and I was listening for a podcast with a neuropsychologist, and they were talking about determinism, free will, the choices we make, and it actually led me to thinking about running as well. And I was just thinking that maybe because of the environment we live in, the results that we have, we kind of predetermine the limits of what we have as well. Because 2:02, 2:03, when the best time in Lithuanian history is 2:12, seems so far away, and it seems like it's even impossible to catch. But I know that it happened in history with breaking the 4-minute mile barrier, 2-hour marathon barrier, and all these thresholds that have been broken. But can it be a psychological effect as well when you're so far away from where the whole other world is? Can it be a limiting factor?
The psychology is important. There's no doubt about that. But I think this is where, again, we come back to, are you setting up your environment correctly? You know, one of my early experiences was Chelsea Football Club. And I saw immediately at age 20 what true high performance was really like and what a high performance mindset was like. And, you know, my boss at the time, he described high performance as the relentless pursuit of being better at all the things across all areas every single day. And you can probably hear a bit of that from what I'm describing. And I think about this all the time. And, you know, in athletics, I remember spending 2 months with the coaches at Altus back in 2014, Stu McMillan and Dan Paff, and talk about exposure to what world-class coaching looks like. And so I think this is an interesting piece around, if you feel like psychology is a barrier for you, well, you know, the internet is a wonderful thing. Start listening to some people who have those kind of experiences, and it will start normalizing some of those things. If you have the opportunity to try and get into some of those environments, you know, we were having conversations about this yesterday because it normalizes those things. But then again, the training, like, how are you designing training to make sure that it's giving you feedback that you're on a path to do something? Yeah. So if you're operating in isolation or you feel your environment isn't giving you that, then that's probably a good place to start.
Yeah, because that's actually one of the things that I've noticed when I started going to the training camps abroad.
Yes.
Like here in Lithuania, if you become national champion, you're really happy, you're the best in the country and so on, but your result is like in 800 meters, like 10 seconds slower than Marco Europe is running and other really fast guys are doing. And then I went to a training camp in Montegordo in Portugal.
Yeah.
And you can see a team of French guys, maybe 10 to 15 guys, just casually cruising at the 3 minute per K pace around the track. And then you see all the other Olympic level athletes. And when you see how different the level is, you understand that you cannot stay in this bubble of yours, which is really a small bubble, because there's a really big and talented and fast bubble a little bit away from your country. And that opens up your mind, that opens up your eyes, and then you understand that if you want to achieve those results, that level, you need to live and believe that you can do that, and try to incorporate and implement things that they're doing, learn from them, not to get stuck on the level that we are on.
Yeah, I think this is where the framework we talked about is really helpful for people, because when we don't really define what the athlete goal is, and we then don't define what the event demand is, we're kind of sort of moving along without like a North Star and the, let's say, reality and accountability component of that high support, high challenge piece. Because everyone can want to be an Olympian, right? But that means certain things.
Yeah.
Right. So then it becomes, well, how serious are you? And it's fine if that's not your goal, right? Again, these aren't better or worse. These are just different goals. But we have to understand, if our goals are ambitious, if our goals are lofty, it's not a joke at the Olympic podium level. It's not a joke. And even between the first round at the Olympics and the final is enormous. The gulf is enormous. You know, and so characterizing what those event demands are and understanding who you are and what environment, what kind of training plan is going to suit the things that you have, is like, that's such a big part of it at the beginning.
Okay. So it's not just a game. It's just a.
It can be. But hey, if you want to be in the sport for fun, that's a great thing.
No, I
right?
mean reaching the Olympic level. Yeah, of course.
But we've all seen the margins. We've all seen the margins, and some of the worst situations you come across is people who just missed out, and they've worked 4 years to just miss out, or they've worked 8 years to just miss out, and it didn't go right, and they've got to wait another 4 years. And do you want that to be you? Because there's one scenario where that happens and you go, okay, well, we did everything we could, right? We checked all the boxes. We knew where we were heading. I had a great setup, a good, supportive, high challenge, an informed environment. You can go, okay, well, I left it all on the field, right? I left it all on the track. I did all that I could. That's a very different feeling. However, you can't control the outcome, but you can control your inputs, right? The other scenario is, well, we kind of tried a bit. Hope was really our strategy. And then you're really disappointed. And so, well, these are all choices, right? And we have to own our choices. And I think, for athletes, you get one chance at this. You really get one chance at this. And so, do you want to be the athlete at the end of your career where you look back and go, oh, I kind of didn't take it that seriously, but maybe I had some of the talent? I think that's a really uncomfortable feeling at the end of your career, and I'm not sure it goes away either.
Yeah.
And so these are the things that we want to, set up the chance for. Hey, if you have a goal that's up here, well, let's go, right? And let's have as clear a picture of everything that's going to be required along the way, and set you up as best we can.
I think that's a really strong message, and I hope that everybody listening will hear this, because the hard the whole, the goal, not the whole, the more input of yours should be in there, and as you mentioned, you gotta understand what it takes from you to go from point A to point Z, and not forgetting those small points in between.
But maybe just to touch on that point, a common question is, okay, it's all very well talking about Olympic level and what does that look like, but I'm a development athlete, right? Or I'm well away from that. Like, what does this stuff even mean?
Mm-hmm.
And a way of thinking about that is a framework I like to use, which is used in the startup world, called ABZ.
Mm-hmm.
And a comment that a lot of companies will say is that a lot of people will get caught up in C through Z, right? All this stuff is like, you're not there yet. Like, don't worry about that, right? Where really you want to know these three things. You want to know Z, your ultimate goal. Where are we heading, right? Which direction is the ship pointing in? Then A, where are we now, right? So that might be, what is our training status? Are we fit, healthy? What type of mileage and things are we doing across different intensities? Is that where it needs to be? Are we addressing all the limitations we have to help us move to the next step? And we want to really spend time on that process, because the only thing you need to be worried about right now is B, which is the next thing to move you to the next rung on the ladder, with Z in mind, but not focused on all this other stuff, because ultimately it's a game of limiting factors. And as you move along this path from high school to college to wherever you end up, the determinants shift and your limitations will shift. And so at each step, the only thing that's going to move you to the next rung on the ladder is addressing that limitation. So there's no good a 16-year-old trying to do Olympic level workouts. Like, we have to meet you where you are, and that's one of the tricky things, again, with models, because often it's like a training week should look like this. as you'll maybe have picked up from the presentation and maybe from the podcast so far, I don't have too fixed an idea of what training sessions specifically need to look like. It's more, are we stimulating the things we want to and meeting you where you are today? If you think of your physiology as constantly in flux, right? So you're either kind of really building it or you're detraining it. There's no real in between. So what I want to do every day is really try and understand, where are you today? What's the most appropriate session for you today based on where you are? Not based on an arbitrary number, but based on maybe what you did on Tuesday. I'm going to decide what you do Wednesday. And it just needs to be enough more to progressively overload. And that's it, right? And just if you do that for a long period of time and you don't hugely over or undershoot that, then you set yourself up in a good sense. Don't get me wrong. There are times where you need to train hard. But the question is always, are you ready and physically prepared to go and do that thing? Or by doing it, are you going to put yourself at a higher risk of eating into that 80%, of cutting your consistency of training? You know, if one big session doesn't build a career, it's no good having an amazing Tuesday and then Wednesday through Sunday is horrible because you're recovering. So I think these are the decisions that help set you up.
Yeah. So maybe we can dive a little bit deeper into the into those, as you really nicely put it, the menu of how that from point A, when we have a point Z in mind, and having those next steps. Where should we even begin? We have a developing athlete that wants to be, let's say he wants to be an Olympian. He or she wants to be an Olympian athlete. Where do you even start by programming or planning what they need to do?
I think, let's do menu items and then go athlete profiles. Let's do that.
Okay. Yeah.
So, table stakes is having the right training items every week. So one of the things that, again, are common traps in middle and long distance coaching is most of the models are either very speed and high intensity oriented, or they're very endurance and volume oriented. And the problem is that in all of these events, everything from 400 through to the 10K, the marathon a little bit, but you know, the balance is a little bit different with the marathon. All events require speed and endurance.
Yeah.
So to paint this picture, for the men's 10K, if you want to be on the Olympic podium, we're talking about being in, 26:45 shape.
Or even faster sometimes.
Or faster, yeah, but around there. A 2:25 last K and a 52 to 53 second last 400. Right, that's approximately where that is. So there will be people listening going, hey, if I started the race on lap 24 and had to run a 52:53, I couldn't do it, even if I started 24 laps after everyone else. And so this is the number one thing that why speed and endurance together in training for development is so important, because you can't realize when you get to Z that, I need speed now.
Might be a little bit too late.
Yeah, exactly. And again, I've met athletes like that. I remember one athlete, they'd run 13:05 5K, right? World-class 5K time. No problem. They said to me, I have no problem qualifying for the major championships, but every time I go there, my doors get blown off with 600 meters to go and I can't compete. And, we did some testing with him, and I remember had no skills in coordination, basic reactions off the ground, had never learned how to sprint. And the question I always ask is, how did we get to this point? How did we get to this point where 13:05, and this was 5 years ago, right? Like 13:05 at that time was like, you might be somebody that we're talking about if you can also do that piece at the end.
Yeah.
you know, but that gap in development punished the athlete when they got to Z, and happens they've gone on to do very well in the marathon. Fantastic. But not everyone gets that chance. And so when I think of a training menu item list, the first thing I think about is, imagine all of the qualities are like buckets, right? Where you're trying to fill the bucket to 100, and 100 means we've tapped out the potential of that thing. The thing that is probably easiest to and quickest to develop to a fair degree of, filling the bucket to 85, 90% is sprinting speed. Now, we're not saying develop sprinting speed because you are a sprinter, but I think of sprinting speed like scaffolding, because middle distance race pace or surging or a kick in a race operates above your VO2 max pace in what we call the anaerobic speed reserve, which is the speed range from your 3K, 5K pace to your all-out sprinting pace. So if you imagine you have a very small speed reserve.
I'm probably going to put some graphs here.
Yeah, we can do that afterwards, yeah. You can imagine if you have a very small speed reserve, that surging and trying to go with the kick, you're working at a very high percentage of what you have to try and keep up. Whereas if you have a larger reserve, then actually it feels more comfortable. You can be a bit more relaxed. You have the technical biomechanical skills to move and change position and express more force. And yes, there's an energy system piece underneath it. But in development, we need to be able to develop that quality fresh. Because later on, once we've got training age behind us and years of training, we can then do the under fatigue piece. But if we don't have that scaffolding built to begin with, then that's where you end up in that situation we talked about, right? Where my doors get blown off with 600 to go because I've never developed that skill set. And so we want athleticism. The second item I would be thinking about is, and we should come back to how we develop sprinting speed too in endurance.
Yeah.
The second menu item would be mechanics at race pace. Now, often in our teaching, I think both in, historical coach education, but also in the research, there's a big energy system bias. And what does that mean? That means that often programming of a training week comes from what's the physiology adaptation we're trying to get. And as a physiologist, I'm telling you, that's a big part of the training problems I see, because we automatically think that we need the aerobic and anaerobic system all the time, when actually what you do need is, yes, the aerobic system, so your lower moderate intensity, but then your sprinting side of things, which is limited not by energy system, but by technique and force. So when we think of race pace sessions, rather than it being a physiology aim, it's more about, lots of coaches will say, hey, look, that runner looks very smooth and has this fast, relaxed look to them. We want to train that skill. So a session that might look like, you might do something like, 80-meter efforts at 800 race pace, and the rest might be 2 to 3 minutes. In week 1 of the season, you might do 2 of them. But every week you build the volume out of that. And, very quickly, you're now building some real quality, some mechanical competency of the skill of race pace running. And the relationship between that sort of fast, relaxed, and your sprinting speed in terms of mechanics is really important for that being able to change gear as an athlete and be comfortable with surging and to know what that should feel like. Because again, if you're searching for what does this feel like fresh, you're not going to find it fatigued. You'll just get found out. And that's the uncomfortable reality. Like, I remember when I did my world tour and was testing the sprinting speed of middle long distance runners, I had to have the conversation of, we're not talking about strides. We're talking about sprinting. And lots of the athletes did not have a coordination technical frame of what that should actually feel like and move like. And again, these were decent national level, international level athletes. They'd never learned the skill. And so the best service we can give to young athletes is developing this top end, the awareness of what it feels like, not with the fatigue of the energy system programming, but those two really key items.
Speed and race mechanics.
Yes. The next two I think about are your moderate and low intensity. So we'll do those two. Aerobic fitness, I think of like a bank account, right? Where you're low and moderate intensity. So moderate intensity being that in second inflection on the lactate curve, threshold running, which would typically be a 5 or 6 out of 10 type effort, somewhere around your 80% of your max heart rate. When you're breathing, you should be breathing deeply, but when you stop, you can talk immediately. If you're hyperventilating there, you're working too hard. So this moderate intensity and low intensity are like making deposits in a bank account. When you do VO2 max work or you do race pace chemistry type work that we talked about, so an example of that would be something like, 5-3-2 all at 800 pace off 6 to 8 minutes, or 4x400 at 800, 1500 pace off 6 to 8 minutes. Those workouts make withdrawals. Now, yes, you do get a sort of peak from them, but it doesn't last for very long. So we want to be very deliberate when we make those withdrawals. So that's why the low and moderate are so important. And because in low and moderate intensity, your body is in steady state physiology, that means the fatigue cost is much lower if it's executed right.
Yeah.
And so what that also enables in development athletes is the opportunity to hone those skills of race pace technique and sprinting speed, which are very much skill, coordination, motor learning things. And so by being fresher from doing low and moderate intensity, you actually can make bigger inroads in those qualities. And just as an example, in some junior athletes at IMG Academy, I had a colleague who was able to move the sprinting speed on by 1 meter a second as an average across a squad of 20, 25 young tennis players, 1 meter a second in 12 weeks. So that's taking some individuals who start with a sprinting speed of 7 something to 8 something. Now, if you're somebody with a sprinting speed of 7 something, moving it to 8 something will change your life. It will change your life. And then over time, you really just chip away at those things. And so that's where we talk about how quickly can you raise that ceiling of it. Very quickly. You can get to 80, 90% of your potential in that quality raised pretty quickly, in like a 12-week period, if you are focusing on building it, if it's there in the program. And then over time, you just chip away. And sprinting for distance runners is not the same as sprinting for sprinters. This is a really important point. One of the common mistakes I see is either sprints coaches coming into the distance world and delivering speed without the total understanding and appreciation of the volume side of middle distance training. And on the endurance side of things, we're used to higher volume prescriptions. And when you see sprint workouts, it doesn't look like a lot. And so you think
330s?
Yeah, exactly. 330 meters is like, that doesn't seem like a lot.
It's not a workout.
Yeah. Oh, maybe we should do 5 or 10 of these. But, something like twice a week, 2 to 3 efforts is all you need.
For a middle distance.
Yeah, it really is all you need. So we're talking about the end of a warm-up, right? Before you do a tempo run, before you do some race pace mechanics, before you do some hills. I also think it's important to state that might not be your starting point. My experience with 16 to 18-year-old age group distance runners is they haven't always learned the general athletic qualities of coordination, or let's say gym-based movements where they're just athletic, right? They can react and bounce off the ground, or they can hold their core and they can hold good postures, and they have the right range of motion to be able to set up the foot to strike the ground well to sprint. So we might be talking about a 6 month to 1 year on ramp to getting a young middle distance runner to the point where they are structurally ready to handle sprinting on a track in spikes consistently. So what does the on-ramp look like? Well, some very low level, and we can put this kind of resource at the bottom of the show notes. Some low level standing plyometrics, right? Where you maybe start double leg, then move to single leg. Maybe you do jump rope skipping. To start to develop some of these reactive qualities on the ground, if you think of every foot strike is an opportunity to express force, and there's a message that goes from your brain through your body, and all your muscles have to coordinate and be in the right position to do that effectively. This skill transfers into economy if you're a marathoner, and it really, applies with surging and race kicking, is this efficiency and quality of the foot strike and the contact. And so a lot of the things that you're chipping away at are the building blocks. So you might progress for those kind of things again over a three-month period. Then we might start talking about, okay, maybe some hills. Well, we're not in spikes, but the hill angle creates a constraint that forces you to be in a good technical position to apply force and learn how to do that. And then we can progress from there, so there's a really nice on-ramp there for distance runners. Where does it go wrong is over-programming. Once you start to get towards 7, 8, 9, 10 reps of sprinting a week, we're probably doing too much.
Yeah.
We want it as part of the context of the whole thing.
Yeah, and we're actually talking about young developing athletes, but it also applies because a lot of people that are listening to this podcast are amateur runners that are in their 20s, 30s, 40s.
Yeah.
And I think that also applies to them. Like
100%.
Before you go sprinting 30-meter all-out sprints, maybe all you need to do is rudiment hops, just basic plyometric stuff. Uphill strides, maybe even start with strides, not sprinting, and then just gradually increase the intensity and lower the volume.
And also things like, if you have an anterior pelvic tilt, I'd probably fix that first before going there. I'd also think about things like eccentric strength of the hamstrings, because again, if there's weakness here, we're in a compromised position when we start running. And often as a distance runner, we haven't necessarily developed those qualities. And so, we want to really take the time with that foundation. And again, take that view of, okay, these are all blocks in a wall, right, towards that end goal. But this scaffolding of those 4 items and that gym work really focused on addressing those limitations, right? And building some resilience to handle training. And also, move the needle on those limiting factors. I think that's a great starting point.
Yeah. So the 4 items would be sprinting, race pace mechanics, not race pace chemistry, as you mentioned. Then aerobic work, which is maybe we could even say that controlled, not too high intensity, as you mentioned, 5 or 6 out of 10, 80% of maximal heart rate, and then the gym work.
Yeah, we should maybe talk to just the low intensity quickly.
Yeah.
So I think one of the important points with low intensity is it just needs to be easy. It needs to feel easy. A speed-based runner doing low intensity continuously is not easy for them. If anyone's seen a sprinter jog, they will know what I'm talking about. It looks very uncomfortable. There's a high perceived effort. Typically, those type of athletes don't have a biomechanical movement pattern that's comfortable at that pace. And so I would just take it off feet, use cross training, use those things. Again, we want consistency. So if chasing, building out a long run is getting in the way of that, or is getting in the way of being able to consistently do the key sessions, which might be 2 to 3 times a week, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, or Tuesday, Friday, then why are we chasing that? That's over-indexing on a training item. I think in time, and again, relative to your event, something like the marathon, certainly you want to be more dialed in and have more resolution on those things. But I think for development athletes, you want to learn pacing. You want to understand what moderate feels like. because as you get to senior training loads and you're doing more, you have to be able to know what the right effort should be for the intention. And this matters not just in training execution to keep it consistent, but also then when you go and try and deliver a performance, right? Again, what shape am I in? What am I ready to go and deliver? And do I know what that feels like? Because if I don't, that's where you get these really divergent results, right? A women's 1500 meter runner needs the standard of 405, and I'm in 410 shape for 1500. I can't go out in 405 shape. Like I can't go out in 405 pace. Well, I can, but we know what's going to happen in the last 800, right? But this happens left and right. And so again, when you have a smaller talent pool, like all these decisions matter. And it's not saying that there's not times where you go, yep, let's just go and race. But there is, you want to be deliberate if you want to move up the levels, because sometimes you get an opportunity once to go and execute a race. And so you want to execute to the best you have in that moment.
Yeah. And I think developing the feeling is actually, for some people, a really hard thing to do. And we notice this because we do a lot of lactate testing. And one metric, we use heart rate, we use lactate, and then we use RPE, relative perceived exertion. And one of the toughest things to do for people, especially doing the test for the first time, is to understand what is 1, what is 5, what is 10. And when you have the full scale, when you start at 7-minute pace per kilometer, let's say, and you finish at 320, then you have the full scale of 1 to 10. And then you know that 6, and when we're talking about the threshold, let's say, okay, so 6 feels like this. Now you know, and then you understand that. And when you have the full scale, I think it's easier to evaluate for yourself and tell yourself what it feels. Because sometimes with younger athletes, especially, when you say 6 out of 10, it might be a little bit tricky for them. 6 is like, yeah, it's 6, and then they're running at a 3K pace.
Sure, and I think there's levels to this, right? So with the training side of it, you want multiple metrics.
Yeah, definitely.
You want to be looking at the heart rate, the blood, if you can take it for lactate. Probably only starting that in the, older than 16, 17, 18. You don't need to be doing that any younger than that.
Okay.
Probably 17, 18, I would be thinking more about that side of things. But then the breathing is something you can listen to. Mm-hmm. You want to understand the feeling. The perception, that will come, but people will have different sensitivities across those metrics. So you want sort of a global picture to get a feel. I often would go on a bike with athletes and I can hear the breathing. Okay, that's too hard, turn it down. And it's usually small adjustments, right? On a threshold session, for example, 2-3 seconds a kilometer makes a big difference.
Yeah.
But with the racing stuff is harder.
Yeah, definitely.
Because a lot of those metrics don't matter in the same way. You really are reliant on your feel and your breathing. And just, how's the body moving today? What does a pace feel like?
And also the race dynamics.
Yeah. And so that's where this race pace mechanics session can also be a really valuable tool for coaches and athletes, because you're every week checking in and calibrating. How does this feel? If you're an 800 meter person, what do 25s feel like versus 26s for 200 versus 24s? Okay. Because then if the pacer goes out in 23,
which is today.
Yeah. I mean, if you can't handle 23.5, you have no business going out in 23.5, even if that's what everyone else is doing. That's just going to end in disappointment. So I call these tipping points. You want to know your tipping points for a race. And then you might go in, let's say, to 1500. If you come back to, I think 405 is 65s per 400. I think that's about right.
Mm-hmm.
But if we're not in 4:05 shape, where might you start? Well, you might start the first couple in 67 and be in the race with 800 to go. And then think about, okay, well, what does it look like if I turn down to 66 and then give what I have left at the end? Maybe that's a truer reflection of the shape I'm in and giving me the chance to execute my best race, as opposed to starting at 65 and it being over with 800 to go. And so these are the details that matter at the sharp end. You can't escape that. I think so. Developing that feeling early on is a really important skill, because the best athletes can make that adjustment. Let's say you, in an indoor season or an outdoor season, when you come out in maybe after altitude or maybe not in April and you race your first race, you might have 3 races lined up and you want to try and get, let's say, your qualifying time within that window. So you can go back to training ahead of the big championship. You might not try and run your fastest time in that first race. You're probably more using that race to go, now, does 67s feel good, or does 66s feel good, or does 65s feel good? Because even if we take that example, right, and let's say it was 67, 67, 66, 65. Let's say we did that, right? The math's not quite working out there, but you get the idea. Well, maybe the next one, after that, we evaluate how that pace felt. And maybe it's like, okay, maybe we can turn the dial down a bit faster. So maybe we just run the first lap at 67 and then we go 66. Okay, there already you found a second. Right? And so these are like the decisions of over-egging it. It's like that's when you get the big disappointments. But I think being really strategic, and again, another opportunity here is you have one indoor track and opportunity to set up races, and what shape are people in and what pace do you need to set things up for? Are we thinking about that? Yeah. We should be. Again, these are opportunities, right? And I think that's the other side of it, is you have to think about what are the unique advantages you have that others don't have, and they exist. Yeah,
hopefully, because in these kind of
I'm going to challenge you there. It's not hopefully, no, they do, right? High performance is a mindset.
Okay.
Right? It's about, okay, let's get together and really go, okay, what does it mean to be Lithuanian as a competitor? Right? What does it mean, and how can we build something around this? I think this is really important, because those are things that only you can do as a nation.
Yeah. Nice. Okay, so we only have a couple of minutes left, actually. Time flies. Should we talk a little bit about profiling, or?
Yeah, we can do.
Yeah, maybe just a quick.
Yeah. So let's say one of the challenges with models for middle distance athletes is that the variability of types of athletes that can be successful is so high. And so an important first step is identifying which type of person are we dealing with, which athlete profile do we have, because the solutions you come up with training will be very different if you're talking about a speed-based person or an endurance-based person. The way that I would look to do that is first measuring their sprinting speed. So 50-meter effort, I would set up timing gates, or if you only have stopwatch and cones, I would also do that. Try and take 5-meter splits for the last 20 meters of that 50-meter effort. Use speed as distance over time, and there you have an estimate of someone's sprinting speed. For 800 meters, around 10 meters a second on the men's side is someone who's either a speed or maybe hybrid type profile. We'll come to that a bit more in just a second. The other side of the equation is a 6-minute effort.
VO2 max.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. So this is going to be somewhere around 2K pace. And those two metrics together give you a really nice snapshot of the balance of your group. And then we can have better conversations about which training direction do we take each of these individuals. But without capturing this up front, you start people in a model. And it's very likely that you end up with what I would call athlete training mismatches. And so this is when we come back to our model of like athlete potential. We've got a disconnect, right? We have a disconnect between who you are and what the training model is. And so when you don't have a large talent pool, you really want to make sure you have a good understanding of who that person is and where they are. Are they more speed? Are they more endurance in terms of their balance? And looking at both together. You then want to go on a path with training of saying, well, how does this person respond to this type of work or this type of work? And everything you observe, you learn and you characterize. And over a 2-year period of exposing people to everything from speed to endurance consistently, people will start to show themselves as having strengths in certain areas, and you want to follow that and be curious with that and feed that. And this is not about not training people from their weaknesses. This is about, by understanding who they are, we can better train those weaknesses through that lens. So an example would be, we talked about speed-based runners and jogging. A common thing would be speed-based runner needs to get fitter aerobically. So the common way that people might try and do that is go, we need to build out your long run. But
run the miles.
But we know that they're biomechanically horrible at slow speeds. There's a high perceived effort, high lactate for that. It's kind of a disaster. So instead, there's 2 things I would think about. One is, okay, let's get the easy feeling from things that are off feet. Maybe we could use like the Barbosa Brazilian circuits, where, you know, lightweight, high repetition, and then maybe a bit of running in between, but you can build up quite quickly 25-30 minutes of activity. But the primary aerobic stimulus I'd be thinking about for them would be that threshold running, but not, again, packaged in the way that you would do it for a endurance type profile. Because what do we know to be true about a speed profile? We know that they are probably a bit more fast twitch. Anything continuous becomes quite anaerobic. So you want the reps to be short. You don't want the recovery to be too short because their clearance isn't trained that well. And you stack volume that way. So an example would be, you know, using 12 to 16 by 400 as a starting point, or you might even start that as 200s.
Yeah.
You know, and have 30 to 45 seconds rest, and you're building volume through that way. You're not trying to build them out to 2, 3, 4 minutes. You're trying to stack volume through 200 and 400 repetitions with the principle that we know if the rep is too long, the physiology is going to climb to harder than we want. It's more mechanically comfortable for the athletes because it's a bit faster than just slow jogging. And I think these are places to start. And so you can see quite quickly when you start from who the person is, your training solutions are different. And any model, whichever side, whether it's an endurance type model or speed type model, just isn't acknowledging that. And so this is where the principles enable you to build from where an athlete is. You may take examples from models that maybe suit the person you're working with, but over-indexing on a model, I think, is a lot of the trouble that people run into.
Yeah, so yeah, as you mentioned, we have 3 types of, when we're talking about middle distance and especially 800-meter guys, the sprint, the hybrid, and the endurance, and they all require different training programs and stimulus and everything. So the coach needs to be really careful about what they're choosing, and not maybe even careful, but you need to test just to see what the profile is, and then you just implement those things.
Yeah, I think if the question is about delivering on someone's potential, it starts from really understanding who the athlete is. And athletes, if you're listening, it's like you want to understand the thing that makes you good. I'm yet to meet an athlete who doesn't want to have a conversation about that, who doesn't want to understand the things that make them good at what they are. because wherever your Z is, like that's the thing that you're going to use to have your best performances. And so your career really should be about pursuit of trying to understand that as early as you can, and then doing all the things to maximize that thing. And then all the other stuff, yep, there's going to be certain levels those things need to be at, but you want to train that through understanding who you are and your goal and the event you're aiming for, and then think about, okay, well, which type of tactical scenario is going to best suit me asserting my strengths on a race? Like, these are really important questions that often don't get talked about. So I'm glad we had the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, and I think that's the perfect way to end actually this podcast. And we came back to the thing we talked about, that as an athlete, you just need to build everything around yourself that helps you to reach your potential and to reach your goal. And I think that's one of the main takeaways for the athletes. And as long as you have the consistency and the right people and the right environment around you, everything should be fine.
Yeah, and don't set a limit on what that could become.
Yeah, so after today, 2:12:35, I hope it's going to be broken.
Yeah, let's see.
And, so Gareth, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much for coming to Lithuania in general. And hopefully it was really insightful and really nice to have you here. So hopefully it was... you learned as well something about us, about Lithuania, and it was a nice trip for you as well.
Absolutely. And yeah, very impressed with what you guys are doing, and look forward to seeing that grow over time.
So we'll definitely keep in touch. And Gareth, maybe you can tell the audience where they can find the work you do, and if they can get in touch with you.
Yeah, GarethSandford.com is my website, and on there you'll find access to free newsletter, podcasts, and all the socials. So connect in there.
So thank you very much once again, and thank you everybody who's listened to the end. So hopefully it's going to be interesting and valuable for you.